Hello everyone, my name's Razia Iqbal. I present news programmes for the BBC, but I used to be the BBC's arts correspondent for quite a long time, so I'm delighted in that capacity to be here to speak to Rufus Norris and Simon Stevens about Brecht's Threepenny Opera. Everything that I've read about this always talks about it as a socialist critique of the capitalist world, a satire on the capitalist world, which of course makes it absolutely rich for interpretation. Some of you in the audience will have seen it already, some of you are going to see it tonight and perhaps know a little bit about it. But I'm going to start just by asking Rufus Norris, what was the motivation? Why did you want to have this production on here?
I think, I could talk about the importance of it as a kind of a piece that's at the centre of the European canon, and also in the frame of an ambition, maybe for as long as I'm here, to dig into the idea of musical theatre as a serious art form, and as it's a piece that rarely gets done, that it would be great as a provocation to our understanding of that art form. I could talk about those things, but actually that isn't neither of those are the real reason. The real reason is that I absolutely love it, and particularly the music. I did it when I was 16 years old, and it started a love affair which completely lasts until now. It's my favourite music of all the music ever written by anybody. Which is obviously part of my, for the formative experience that it had on me when I did it. But in the end, that's why. And I kind of think that's all right. I sort of think, this is a passionate business. I'm passionate about this piece. And one thing that I'm really passionate, that has been more to do with the timing of it, is that it's difficult. It's really tough, and it's difficult for a couple of reasons. One is the piece itself, and you need partners in crime who are going to give you as good a chance as possible as you can to meet it. And there's no better place, no better theatre, I think, for it than this. And getting the opportunity finally to work with Simon, who I've known for a very long time, but this is the first time that we've had a chance to work together, felt like the perfect moment. And also other people, David Shrubsole, the MD, and Rory Kinnear and others. But there's something that's quite important that I'm sure you'll come to later, which is that Bertolt Brecht died in 1950, and that means, in simple terms, that the estate is coming to a close in terms of the amount of control they've got. And I don't think it's too harsh on the Brecht estate, because it's true of most estates that towards the end of their time, they tend to loosen up a little bit in terms of what they allow you to do. And this is a piece which I always felt needed quite a good grip on the dramaturgy. So to get the right writer to do that, and the collaboration, and I have to say both estates have been absolutely wonderful to work with. It felt like the time was right. Sorry, really long answer.
No, that's fine. So you alighted on Simon Stevens, who has enjoyed such unbelievable success. Simon, what was the appeal for you?
The other way around, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've been kicking it around for bloody years trying to get this on. Before Rufus arrived as artistic director, I remember when he was working here.
The songs?
Similar reasons. I remember bumping into Rufus before he got the job here, and he kind of looked me in the eye when I told him I was doing a version of Threepenny Opera. He kind of looked at me and said, "They get under your skin, those songs." They never leave you. I've never had such a clusterfuck of earworm as I've had while working on this show. It's an extraordinary amount of tunes rattling around my skull at all times. I dream, when you live in a foreign country, you dream in the foreign language eventually. I dream in the music of Kurt Weill at the moment. My appeal for doing this version was the same appeal as the attraction of any version. as I've written a few now, where because I don't speak any languages well enough to translate from them. I've got conversational French and that's it. The tradition in contemporary theatre of British playwrights writing versions of plays that have been translated into a literal, and then I think what I do is I translate from the literal into actable, is a great, great privilege. What directors get to do is directors get to live in the imagination of playwrights for a while. Actors get to do the same thing. All playwrights have is their own imagination, and when you get to my age, that sponge wrings dry. So I work desperately trying to get ideas to keep, because I really like being a playwright. It's really good. I've been lots of different jobs, and definitely being a playwright is the best one. It's definitely the best one. And it's very fragile. If like me, you're a geek of playwriting history, yeah, you study the career arc of most playwrights. They get to around about 38, 39, and then they start repeating themselves, running out of steam, and kind of descending, starting the slow descent into mediocrity and kind of old-fashionedness, and everybody just resents them and wishes they weren't there. And I'm 45 now, so I'm kind of really aware that that is kind of the next stage of my working life. I'm working hard to avoid it, and one of the many things I'm doing to work hard to avoid it is doing lots of versions. Because when you write an English language version of, I've done a Chekhov play, for example, I did Ibsen's A Doll's House, or Erdon von Horvath's Casimir and Caroline, or Jon Fosse's I Am the Wind. What the experience you get is you get to sit in the imagination of another playwright for a time and to make the decisions that they made, to interrogate them, which is the work that a director will do all the time. And it's an absolute privilege to have sat on the shoulders of 3 writers, I think, or 4 writers. You know, it's such a complicated text, this text, initiated by John Gay in 1728, a London writer writing about London, 200 years in production off and on, which Elizabeth Hauptmann, the German poet Elizabeth Hauptmann, saw in the theatre that weirdly I'm associated with, the Lyric Hammersmith. She saw that in 1928, went back to Berlin, saw her mates Bert and Kurt, and said, boys, you've got to do your own version of this. It's a multi-authored, multi-layered text, and to sit inside that text and interrogate those decisions was just a privilege, I think.
Both of you have mentioned the music. Let's talk a little bit, before we talk about what you've done with the music, let's talk a little bit about the characters and how the story is propelled. Because Brecht wasn't a playwright who was particularly interested in the audience loving the characters. So what have you done, Simon, that makes those characters engage with the audience? Because I felt that I did engage in a way that I may not have in other Brecht plays. So what were you thinking about?
It's a very, very complex question. Because on one hand, I have respect for theoretical notions of Brechtian alienation and the political gesture of turning our theatre into a forum not of emotional abandonment, but of thought and critique. I respect that. On the other hand, this was a play that was written in 6 weeks in a chateau in the south of France by 2 guys in their late 20s drinking a ton of wine and trying to seduce Lotte Lenya. You know, you could say it's a deliberate political critique of its culture, and it is. Or you could say it's a bit of a mess, and it is. And what was the privilege about working so late into the estate's hold on it is we could rip into the mess. And I think hold on to the political critique. Fundamentally, what I did is I looked at the characters and I asked myself, what did they want and what was stopping them from getting what they want and what did they do in order to get it? Specifically the women. Because the women in this play, in every version of this play that I've read, in the literal version of this play, are ciphers and they're empty and they have no psychological plausibility. And I didn't want to put my name to a play in which the women could be described like that. Because my own plays do that fine, you know. It was important to me that Polly Peachum became the kind of like heart of the story to a degree. That Mrs. Peachum was not just some kind of weird autonomer acting on the whim of her husband. And I think actually when you complicate those characters, you further complicate Mac, and you further complicate Mr. Peachum, and you start eventually having a network of relationships that are rich and are plausible and are driven by more than just an impulse to speak a social diktat on stage.
And actually, Polly is phenomenally strong. You know, she becomes the accountant of Mac, which is just
watch The Accountants.
It's genius in that respect that you are investing in these women a place on stage that perhaps they didn't have before. And I wonder why did you think that mattered, given that the story is propelled in a completely different way?
My anxiety dramaturgically about the story is it's not propelled by anything other than Brecht's desire to speak and the beautiful Kurt Weill songs, and that dramaturgically it needed an engine. And the engine, the more I worked on it, the more I worked with Rufus, the more I worked with Ben Power, the more I worked with other people here. And, you know, in the great tradition of this being a multi-authored play, let it be known that this version is a multi-authored version. That many, many voices have gone into clarifying this text, including the voices of one of the most intelligent and imaginative company of actors that I've worked with. Most of the best lines are Rory Kinnear's. I just type them out. And I'd like to say I typed them out really well, but anybody who's ever received an email by me will know that I probably typed them out really badly.
But you're just convinced you do it well. Rufus, let's talk about the staging, because it seems to me that an awful lot of effort has gone into making it look like not that much effort has gone into it. So tell me a little bit about the thinking. That's not a backhanded compliment. What I mean by that is that it's not, you know, when you come to the National Theatre, you expect this kind of unbelievably rich set. And it's not to say the set isn't rich, but it's almost as though there's a kind of raggedness to it, but it's an informed raggedness. So talk me through a little bit about what your vision for how it looked was.
Well, it's a tricky challenge, isn't it, to go, you take one of the iconic pieces of Poor Theatre and you put it on in one of the wealthiest theatres in Western Europe. And how is that not hypocritical, or how do you do that without shooting yourself in the foot? So, and also just it was, yes, you can look at the play, the musical as it was written, but you've also got to see it as part of the theatre movement. In fact, the arts movement that was going on at the time in 1928, you know, with Bauhaus and everything else that was going on. You know, Kurt Weill used to ask to be paid in butter, I think, at the time, because the you know, the Deutschmark was worth so little by the time he was actually paid it, and their whole, the Poor Theatre style in the way that it was done, and the use of signs and alienation, as Simon said, but the whole presentation of it is absolutely in the DNA of the piece. It's like several people have asked, and somebody might want to ask in a minute, why haven't we updated it? And I think there's something about that period, that specific moment in time, and also the orchestration of the instruments, which is locked solid. You can't do anything with that. That's the stipulation that the Weill estate put on it. Means that it's you know, I mean, you can see even the way we've dressed up a speaker on the piano there. That, you know, it's harmonium, it's banjo, it's trumpet and shonky old. The whole thing it feels like it's put together in a back room somewhere, and to then put a massive glossy, realistic, okay, let's travel to the East End of London, and now we're going to go to the you know, realistic looking prison or the Savoy Hotel in all its finery, would feel to be completely against what they were saying and what they were trying to do. The point is, I mean, you know, I'm interested in the theory of alienation up to a certain point until I'm in the audience, and then I either believe the characters or I don't. I don't think what they were saying is, thou shalt not believe in what I'm saying. I think they're saying all the dressing up, the fourth wall and everything else that they were kicking against at the time does not mean that people on stage cannot have total integrity. And to whatever degree the original reads in a slightly knocked out manner, the music has all the depth in the world. And I think, all the celebrated versions of all those songs, particularly the ones other than Mac the Knife, because that one's slightly standalone. The heart and soul of them is as rich as anything. So it's a question of how to have an authenticity, but also honour the slightly representational and poor manner in which the piece was born.
So in this new translation, the latest collaboration, which is how you describe it, there's nepotistic peerage system is skewered, the fat cat golden handshake, Little England patriotism. When you were looking at it and thinking about the sorts of things that you wanted the new translation to connect with this audience in London, did those particular things come to mind straight away?
I think they're deep in the text, actually.
No, they are, but there's a kind of obviousness with which you bring them out.
I think when I'm doing a version like that, I think if I tried to think, how can I connect with a contemporary London theatre audience, I'd end up writing nothing. I'd be so paralysed by how daunting that gesture would be that I wouldn't write anything. I'd just write the version that I wish I could see. And if for me it's politically exciting or politically resonant, or for us in the room, or the conversations I was having with Rufus or with Ben or with Rory or with any of the actors, or David Strobsold, the musical director, who worked so closely on the lyrics that they're practically co-written. What was exciting us intellectually, my only commitment was to honour that, was to honour what was exciting us. We didn't have to change a great deal to kind of make a reference to anything that might be very, very contemporary, because the political structures and the corruptions of those structures have been kind of pretty much existent for the past 150 years. We didn't invent a great deal of anything. There's been war in Afghanistan for 150 years. There's been corruption of the monarchy for 150 years. Massive disproportion and injustice in the distribution of wealth in this city and throughout the UK for more than 150 years. It's tapping onto something that deep in that text. And that was the thing, we started off maybe being quite iconoclastic with the notion of Brecht, and if not Weil, but certainly of Brecht. But the more we kicked at him, the more he was robust. So the decisions we made in the final week of the kind of, the technical week, when I watch this production, I'm astonished by how loyal it is to the Brechtian tradition. It doesn't seem iconoclastic to me at all. It seems kind of actually deeply respectful to two writers I have deep respect for.
Rufus, when you think about the principles of epic theatre and how Brecht believed that it should have the power to provoke a change in society, how important was that to you when you talked initially about what appealed to you about this play when you were a teenager and what you loved about it? How much of that resonated with you when you were a teenager, and how much does it inform how you think about this play as a director?
I think it certainly resonated with me when I was 16 and doing it. The idea that we had an instruction we were doing in a very, very large and famous town called Kidderminster. I don't know, those of you not many laughs, not many of you have been there. But in Kidderminster College of Further Education, had a very small studio theatre that we performed it in, and you could see every member of the audience very, very clearly. And we were given the instruction with songs that you should eyeball somebody and you stick with them until they look away. And then you go to the next person and you stick with them until they look away. And, sometimes there'd be some hard nut who thought he could stare me out. And I'd get to 3 verses, but in the end I'd always win. And that gave you a real sense of this is political theatre and this is what, But I was 16 then, and I think times have moved on. It was very powerful, I think, in its day, though it didn't, we noticed, stop what was about to, what came to that community. I don't think theatre can work in the same way now. I think theatre can be incredibly powerful in lots of ways, perhaps on a more personal level, but as a movement for kind of protest, certainly in an organisation like this, I think that's more difficult. But but if you're asking me as an artistic director, how important that is, I think that's fantastically important. You know, recently we had, we had a show on in the Temporary Theatre, which was about 3 Belgian mothers who'd lost their children to Islamic State, and was for me a really strong example of how important it is to educate people. Not in that way, but just to go, this is some information that you may not have known about what is a very complex situation. And I think theatre certainly has an extremely important role to play within that. But audiences are really sophisticated. I mean, what you watch on television or in film now, as soon as you see a message coming, you tend to kind of be very deft in avoiding it or switching channel or, not. So I think it has to be more subtle now.
Tell me, I'm really intrigued to hear that about the collaborative role that actors would play in this particular instance. Yeah. So what sorts of things did someone like Rory Kinnear say to you that might have shifted?
Rory Kinnear is the only actor in my 18-year career that I've ever said to them, you can improvise this bit if you want, because and I would never say it. And if there's any actors sitting out there,
I know
don't expect me to say that. You really don't expect me to say that.
No, there's a few over in auditorium right. I can't see them. David Shrubsole, the musical director, is at the front there.
Oh my God!
Yeah, they all creep in and spy, and you get in trouble later.
The nature of the room, as we moved through rehearsal, was that an atmosphere was created in which we could make sure this text was as strong as we could possibly make it. And sometimes that would involve Rufus really kicking the shit out of my first attempts. And sometimes it wouldn't. And sometimes it would involve actors piping up with discussion or thoughts or questions. They'd ask me questions or they'd kind of say things to me, and it was like you kind of listen to everybody. You listen rigorously and carefully to everybody. And you choose with as much clarity and care as you can the best possible way to dramatize the moments that collectively we're aspiring to dramatize.
That sounds very clever. Actually, what it often came down to was Simon would say to me, okay, give me the shit version.
Yeah.
And then I'd give the shit version. He'd go, okay, I'll go away and digest that. And then it would come back as something kind of gorgeous and speakable.
But also I want to ask you, I mean, it sounds so wonderful when you describe it, but I just wonder about the place of your ego in what you've just described.
It was a withered husk lying on the floor of rehearsal room
ever?
1. No, of course it was present, but if you're going to be too egotistical, write a novel. The nature of theatre is that we collaborate. And I mean that really passionately. And every play that I've written, I consider an initiation of a collaboration that might lead to a night in the theatre. And to consider a play as anything other than that, I think is arcane and old-fashioned. When people talk about the playwright's voice, I think they're so profoundly missing the point of theatre that they really oughtn't be talking about it. That what we do when we write plays, it's like a recipe for a series of chefs to make. What's the point of a recipe that's never cooked? And if you go into a rehearsal room and you want your vision to be served rather than to initiate a conversation or a series of conversations with people as brilliant as this, or people as brilliant as David Shrubsole, to go into that room and have an ego, you'd be wasting one of the greatest opportunities of your career.
It's so clever. I'm so glad I didn't say the playwright's voice. I'm so happy I didn't use that phrase. Okay, so it only leaves for me to say, please put your hands together and thank both Rufus Norris and Simon Stevens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.